Okay, so the next stage we have for our hard ground, if you're going to do Intaglio hard ground, is after you've filed and sanded down your plate, and after you've degreased it, you have to make sure you degrease your plate very carefully. So once we have that done, we have a nice clean copper plate here. We're going to want to put a coating of protective, acid-resistant hard ground on top of it. So traditionally, hard ground was made out of asphaltum or some sort of a grease and wax mixture or something like that. But since we live, in the 22nd century or whatever here, we're going to go ahead and have our hard ground be made out of acrylic. So there's two different kinds of ways you can use hard ground. One of them is a simple floor wax, such as this, which you would use to polish your floors. There's also a special hard ground that we'll have here in the shop that I don't have with me right now that will also be here. But it'll say hard ground on it. It's basically the same thing. It's a thin acrylic layer. And if we just put that thin acrylic layer down, it would be clear. So you wouldn't really be able to see what you're doing. So we've added some black ink. So we've added a whole bunch of black India ink to this in order to get it to be ready. So what you want to do so you can see what you're doing when you scratch through it. So what we want to do to coat this is we want to get a couple of paper towels from over here at the sink. So you want to go ahead and grab some paper towels, and then you want to go ahead and I like to fold mine up sort of like this. And we'll want to place this over here on this cardboard piece. I don't want to do this anywhere else. And then we're going to very carefully open up our hard ground container, and we're just going to pour the hard ground over the top. And we want to just cover this whole entire plate with the floor wax, in this case the hard ground. You want to make sure that it's covering the whole thing and that there aren't a whole lot of nasty sort of bubbles and stuff like that. And you can see here that that's where I didn't mix up the hard ground very well, so I didn't really mix the ink into it. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that up for you now. It doesn't really matter. Again, it's just a lot easier to see it if you have the ink on there. And I'll go ahead and pour that on there again and we can see the difference. But you can see that now there's a whole bunch of bubbles in there, which are going to make my life a little bit harder. So every bubble is a chance for an imperfection. So you want to pour that on. And the idea here is that we're letting this sort of run off the edge. So it's going to run off of that little the corner there. And we're going to try and get this on there in a really thin layer. If we let it dry too thick, it's going to end up being an area that chips off instead of sort of scratches off in a nice way. So what I like to do is go ahead and once it's dripped down and it's kind of done dripping, is I just dab it onto my paper towel here like this, just real carefully. You can see how it's kind of running off of the edge there and kind of collecting there at the bottom. We just want to pull as much of the hard ground off of the plate as possible so that we're getting the thinnest layer we can have on there. So if you look at this now, we have a thin kind of a layer of a bead down there, if you will, of the hard ground, which is going to be a problem for us. We really don't want that to be there. So again, I can keep standing here like this and just kind of dabbing it off with the paper towel and let it kind of run off, and eventually gravity will carry it off. One other thing I like to do is I like to just let the plate dry this way on its corner, and that means all of that hard ground is going to run straight down into that corner, and then all I have to do is just pick this up every once in a while and move it, and it'll kind of dab that off of the corner of the hard ground, or off the plate, and then the hard ground it'll keep running off, and I can just kind of keep moving it around. So while that's drying, and it'll take a good 20-30 minutes for the hard ground to dry before you can do anything with it. So you just kind of want to plan that into your schedule. But before that's done, then I want to very carefully, again, I want to pour my hard ground back into the bottle, because this stuff is very expensive and hard to find actually. And so we want to make sure that we're pouring it back in there. And so I'm going to do it this way, and then I'm going to real carefully let it sort of drip off and get as much of our precious hard ground as we can back into the bottle so we can use it again for the next one. And you only want to use this black tray, this black photo tray for this, along with this particular funnel. If you use a nasty tray full of all kinds of sort of floaties and sinkies and fuzzy things, when you pour it back into the bottle, if it's not clean, that's all going to go in there and it's going to end up messing everything up. So I'm just going to go ahead and let this drip off, take that out, and then I'm going to go ahead and move my plate around again just to make sure that I'm getting, continuing to let that sort of run off so that I have a nice thin area. Then I'll put the lid back on this, on the hard ground, right? And then before this dries, so it's very important, before this dries, I want to go over and rinse this photo tray out really, really well. Do not want to leave this to dry, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I want to go ahead and keep moving this plate around until it stops kind of beating up on the bottom of it, until the acrylic layer has dried really carefully. And you can see that it's still really clear even with all that ink that's mixed into it. So I'm going to keep moving the edge of this plate around until I get it, until it stops kind of beating up at the bottom there, and then I'll let it dry for a good 20-30 minutes and I should be ready to do the next stage.